the San Francisco Bay Area Internet Society chapter. We've also got Chris Mondini here, who is ICANN's Vice President of Global Business Engagement, and Joe Catapano, who is the Manager for North America Stakeholder Engagement. They are over in DC. I'm here in San Francisco, together with Fatima Kotari, who is the chapter's Vice President. So this is the second readout the chapter has organized together with ICANN. We found them to be a really effective way of giving an overview of the key discussions that took place during the most recent ICANN meeting. So what we're going to do is we're just going to give a very short overview of the San Francisco Bay Area ISOC chapter and our work, and then Fatima's going to give that in 1 second. And then we'll hand over to Chris and Joe, who will tell us all about what happened at the most recent ICANN meeting in Abu Dhabi. So Fatima?
Sounds good. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So hello and welcome to our last chapter event for this year. I'm going to quickly kick this off with a quick introduction of the chapter and what we do, especially for those who are joining us for the first time. My name is Fatima, and I'm the Vice President for the San Francisco Bay Area Internet Society, or SFBay ISOC. So our chapter was established in 2009, and since then we've grown to one of the largest chapters in North America, engaging a community of over 2,000 members at the moment. We're committed to the Internet Society's vision of an open internet, and within the chapter, we specifically work to bridge the digital divide that exists in California and address issues of digital inclusion within California. We also have 3 working groups based on our community interest. Those are centered around internet governance, data privacy and security, and Internet of Things. We also organize a lot of local events centered around these working group initiatives, as well as other current topics that affect internet access and adoption, such as freedom of expression online, fake news, addressing the digital gender divide, use of the internet in other verticals such as agriculture, etc. Besides that, we partner with a lot of local conferences like the IEEE Women in Engineering Conference, to collaborate with other communities, and we always strive to keep ourselves updated. So it's been busy, it's been interesting. We're doing a lot of work and projects that are going on in the California market. So we are a volunteer-run nonprofit organization. If this is something that interests you and you'd like to get involved, please feel free to reach out to Susanna, who's also on the call, or to me. We're in the midst of planning all of our activities for the upcoming year. So if you have ideas that might be useful to the community, we'd love to hear from you. That's all I have about the chapter. Over to Chris and Joe for walking us through the highlights for ICANN 60.
Thank you, Fatima. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the ISOC San Francisco Bay chapter for partnering with us. This is the second readout we've done with the chapter, and we like partnering with them. They do great events throughout the year, raising awareness in their community. So we're very pleased to partner with them again. I mentioned this in the chat, but I'll mention it for those on the phone. We'll have time at the end of the session for questions. So if you're on the phone, you can just unmute your line and speak up. And if you're in the Adobe room, best if you can raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can type your question in the chat. We'll go from there. So before we dive into the happenings at the ICANN 60 meeting, for some of the newcomers here that might not know who we are or what we do, we're just going to do a really super high-level overview of that, so you can familiarize yourself with ICANN. So ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, and our mission is to help ensure a stable, secure, and unified global internet. We coordinate the Internet's unique identifiers, and those are domain names, internet protocol addresses, and protocol parameters. And we were formed in 1998 as a not-for-profit public benefit corporation. We are headquartered in Los Angeles. We have regional offices and engagement centers around the world. Chris and I are speaking to you from the Washington, D.C. engagement office, which is the engagement office for the North America region. And here's a look at our community, which is the most important segment of the ICANN structure. There's the ICANN organization, which consists of staff members such as Chris and myself. There is a board of directors, and of course we have a community, a completely volunteer-based community of stakeholders hailing from different sectors: business, the technical community, civil society, governments, end users, and academia. And the community works in a bottom-up process and a multi-stakeholder process to develop policy recommendations and conduct reviews for common problems that are within ICANN's mission and scope. And we'll talk a little bit about the policy development process in the next slide. We have sorry about that. We have four supporting organizations and advisory committees at ICANN. Just want to mention these because there'll be some acronyms in there. So there is the generic name supporting organization, or GNSO. There's the country code name supporting organization, or CCNSO. And there's the address supporting organization, or ASO. We also have 4 advisory committees: the Governmental Advisory Committee, or GAC, the At-Large Advisory Committee, or ALAC, the Root Server System Advisory Committee, or RSAC, and the Security and Stability Advisory Committee, or SSAC. So here is a look at the policy development process at ICANN. You'll see on the left-hand side of the slide the different supporting organizations I just mentioned. Those are the organizations that develop policy within the ICANN structure. And you'll see their process begins with identifying an issue and putting together an issue report. That begins the policy development process. There will be a call for volunteers to develop the policy. And the groups, the working groups at ICANN, conduct most of their business over phone and email lists and web conferences. There are 3 instances throughout the year where the working groups gather and meet face-to-face at the ICANN meetings, and they're held in a different region around the world each time. So you'll see after the policy recommendations are developed, there are public comments by the community, and anybody can comment on an ICANN policy. It's all on our website, and the comments can happen through there. And the policy recommendations are then sent to the ICANN board, and the board reviews the final policy, and then it is implemented. And you'll see on the bottom of the slide are the advisory committees that I spoke to earlier, and they advise throughout the process on the policy that's being developed, and they give advice to the board, and the board considers that. So now a little bit about ICANN 60, which was in Abu Dhabi. As I said, it's one of our 3 meetings throughout the year. This was our annual general meeting. It was a 7-day meeting focused on outreach, capacity building, and showcasing ICANN's work to a global audience. And one of the features of this meeting was a change in ICANN leadership. So we announced new leadership. Shireen Chalabi and Chris Despain were appointed as the new chair and vice chair of the board. And the board also welcomed new board members, Sarah Deutsch, Abri Doria, Leon Sanchez, and Matthew Shears. And I'll just give really high-level background for each of our new board members so you have a sense of their background. So Shireen has an extensive international career in banking and technology, and he was selected by the ICANN nominating committee to serve on the board. And Chris Despain is the former CEO of the .au domain administration and has a background in corporate law. He was selected by the CCNSO to serve on the ICANN board in June of 2011. Sarah is an attorney, and she was selected by the nominating committee to serve on the board. Aubrey is a research consultant, and she was also selected by the nominating committee. And Leon is an intellectual property attorney. He was elected by the at-large community of individual internet users. And Matthew is a internet and telecommunications policy consultant, and he was selected by the GNSO. And also of note, Manuel Ismail of Egypt is the new Government Advisory Committee liaison to the board and is also the GAC chair. And she is Executive Director for the International Technical Coordination at the National Telecom Regulatory Authority of Egypt. So that's a little bit about the changes in leadership, and we'll dive into the ICANN 60 meeting presentation now. And just a word of note, these are just headline developments. It's not an exhaustive list of what happened at the meeting, but there will be links throughout the presentation where you can drill down into the meeting recordings and transcripts if you have a specific desire to learn about a particular topic. Here is a look at the ICANN 60 meeting, some of the numbers. We had more than 300 public sessions, more than 1,900 attendees. We had over 700 newcomers, which is great. And our former board chair, Steve Crocker, received the 2017 Leadership Award. So just some of the highlights from the meeting there. So now we will go into what happened at the ICANN meeting. And I will just do a quick reminder of, we'll go into updates on the generic top-level domain program. And now I'll just do a quick reminder of what the new GTLD program is. GTLD stands for Generic Top-Level Domain. And the program is a program that enabled the largest expansion of the domain name system. And it was put in place to enhance innovation, competition, and consumer choice in the domain name market. And a reminder that top-level domains are the names to the right of the dot, such as .com, .net, or .org. And some of the new ones can have many more names, such as .photography, .guru, or if you're a brand like .barclays for the bank. The application window for the first round of new GTLDs closed in April of 2012. And they're reviewing the program right now with comprehensive reviews. Here's a look at the GTLDs delegated by region. There are more than 1,200 in the internet now. And here's just a look at how they're spread across the globe. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris for the update from the meeting.
Thanks very much, Joe and Susanna and Fatima. It's a pleasure to be with you to tell you a little bit about the actual progress that was made on generic top-level domain policy in Abu Dhabi. Again, this is a very high-level summary, and we're trying to present it in accessible language. So if you have questions or if things aren't clear, please raise your hand, submit a comment in the chat, or feel free to use the links to drill down for more information. So the first update is that there is a review team. These happen regularly. They are convened of volunteers who review ICANN's work. And in this area, they're looking at consumer trust, competition, and consumer choice, and whether the expansion of the generic top-level domain space into all those other choices that Joe told you about actually resulted in increasing competition, trust, and choice. And so they invited an open discussion of three areas: parking of domain names, domain name system abuse, and the rights protection mechanisms that exist in the GTLD program. Parking refers, of course, to domain names that are registered and then not used. Domain name system abuse refers to people using their website registrations to commit some sort of a cyber abuse or cybercrime. And then rights protection mechanisms are those mechanisms that were put in place when the GTLD program was introduced to help people who are owners of intellectual property or trademarks to protect those marks in the domain name space. And again, at a very high level summary, the findings were that the introduction of new GTLDs did not increase the total amount of abuse across all GTLDs, which is to say that the sort of percentage of malefactors using domain names to do bad things has remained constant even as the expansion, there's a greater number of top-level domain names. There is more infringement of trademarks in the new generic top-level domains than there were in the 22 legacy top-level domains. But the rights protection mechanisms are considered generally to have been helpful in mitigating those risks. The parking of GTLDs, the registering for them and not using them for anything is higher than anticipated than in the legacy GTLDs. So these are all continuing under review, and there's a recording of the session, and you can find out to become involved if you care about these issues. On the next slide, there's an explanation of the GNSO's chartering of a working group to start what's called a PDP, or policy development process, to review all of the rights protection mechanisms developed for new generic top-level domains. And that includes the Trademark Clearinghouse, which is a global database of every trademark in the world that we're attempting to be built, the Universal Dispute Resolution process, and other processes where if you own a trademark, you can seek redress if it's being abused in the domain name. And so there's a recording here of this event, and the working group, of course, invites observers, and there will be multiple public comments and opportunities to participate. While in Abu Dhabi, the community also addressed some legal and some technical topics that are legal topic that's affecting ICANN's work is something called the European Union General Data Protection Regulation. And this is a legislation authored by the European Commission that will come into effect in May of next year and be enforced throughout the 27 member states. And that calls for organizations that have do business in Europe, have customers who reside in Europe, or offices and operations in Europe, to abide by rules about how they collect and share and use data related to those EU citizens and residents. And so this affects ICANN in a couple of ways. One is that ICANN itself maintains databases related to stakeholders and also registrants of web names. And the registries and registrars, those companies that through whom you've probably registered a web address, they also maintain an important database referred to as WHOIS, which keeps, for technical reasons, for administration reasons, but also for law enforcement and rights protections reasons, maintains information on web registrants. And so all of these are going to be affected by the legislation, and so the community is engaged in a very broad discussion about how ICANN can interact with the European Union, learning more about guidance on how this will be enforced, and learning about how ICANN might need to adjust its own policies, procedures, and even contracts with registries and registrars. So if you're interested in the intersection of regional or national law and ICANN policies, this is an excellent case study, and I would encourage you to have a look at the transcript or watch the recording of the session in Abu Dhabi. technical community is very engaged in something called the Security, Stability, and Review Team. This review is something that happens on a regular basis. It's mandated by the bylaws, and it examines how effectively ICANN is meeting its commitments on stability, reliability, resiliency, and security of the global DNS. So this is where our DNS security colleagues are able to weigh in and tell ICANN how it's doing and what it needs to adjust to do better. In this case, the ICANN board, asserting its oversight role, actually had heard from members of the community that the SSR2, the Security, Stability, and Resiliency Review Team number 2, because it's the second time, was delayed in getting to the issues within its scope, was potentially wandering beyond its scope, and they were concerned about some of the resources engaged for the review. The board asked the review team to pause its work, and there was a meeting held at the end of the Abu Dhabi meeting to do a reset and a review, and that review will be again underway very soon. So I'm going to pause there and let me see. This is Joe's topic, right?
Yes.
I'm going to hand it back to Joe.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So now we'll talk a little bit about what happened in relation to enhancing ICANN's accountability. But before we go there, we'll do a little bit of background. So the process for the work on enhancing ICANN's accountability stemmed from something referred to as the IANA stewardship transition. IANA stands for the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, and it is the entity that operates the unique identifiers I talked about at the top of the program. So the IANA stewardship transition was the final step in a 2-decade-long process by the Department of Commerce to transition the coordination and management of the DNS to the private sector. And the community developed 2 parallel processes for the transition. One focused on the transition itself to transition the stewardship of the IANA from the U.S. government to the global multi-stakeholder community, and a second parallel process to ensure ICANN remains accountable in the absence of the U.S. government oversight. So the transition and the first work stream of accountability concluded on October 1st of 2016. So we're just over a year into the new structure. And the second work stream of accountability work remains ongoing. And here is a graphic, a look at the unprecedented multi-stakeholder effort that was the transition and the first work stream of accountability work. There were more than 800 working hours, more than 33,000 email exchanges, more than 1,100 events around the world. So this was really a very large, big milestone in multi-stakeholder cooperation and policy making. So on the areas for accountability enhancements, there is what we refer to as a cross-community working group that is working on accountability. And the cross-community working group has subgroups on various topics, such as jurisdiction, human rights, ICANN staff accountability, community accountability, among others. And the highlight of the meeting was that all of these subgroups submitted their draft or final recommendations on their topics, and now they're going to be ready to put out for public comment in individual capacity. And after the public comment, the draft recommendations will be consolidated and published for a more coordinated public comment forum in March 2018. March 2018 is, as we'll talk about later, is also the month and year of the next ICANN meeting, ICANN 61, which will be in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So there's quite a bit more that you could go in depth into some of this work. We just wanted to do a very brief highlight. You can take a look at some of the links we have in the slides. We'll distribute the slides after the presentation. There's a statement from the accountability co-chairs that goes a little bit more in depth into some of the work. And then there are transcripts and recordings of the sessions that are available there. And now for our next section, we'll go back to Chris.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so that's some of the topical, a topical look at some of the activities at Abu Dhabi. And now we're going to look at the activities of the Governmental Advisory Committee, the GAC, and the At-Large Advisory Committee, the ALAC. And just, again, it's just a snapshot of a few of the high-level issues. As many of you on the call know, the GAC works as an advisory committee to the board so that the development of policy related to domain names gets input from governments and public authorities so they can review how it interacts with their role in terms of public service, public safety, and public policy. And so in Abu Dhabi, there was a long list of issues that were addressed. Some of them were from the accountability work that still goes on that Joe referred to. And for example, human rights and international law and how those are considered within ICANN, ICANN's jurisdiction, and GTLD.Amazon, which you may have heard about. The communique, which the GAC offers at every meeting, the Abu Dhabi one, is at the link on this slide 23. And to go into just a little bit more detail on the slide on these issues are the links on the particular matters under discussion. The human rights and international law, you may remember if you attended the last call, was a placeholder where the community agreed that there should be some mention in ICANN's bylaws of respecting generally accepted human rights in the way it does its work. And the community is undertaking to implement that and come up with a framework of interpretation of how to implement that. And certainly governments have a very strong voice on that issue. On jurisdiction, which also is looking at where ICANN's contracts with registries and registrars can be adjudicated in the event of disputes, which jurisdictions or, for example, currencies that can be accepted where ICANN needs to be registered to have transactions, and so forth. These are all issues on the subgroup on jurisdiction, and again, the GAC and the governments have a very strong interest in how this transpires, and so GAC noted the recent outputs of that subgroup and continue to support the process by which recommendations are being developed. So if you're interested in that issue, I encourage you to look at the link on the slide. And then finally, in the first time ever that this has happened, individual corporation, in this case the Amazon Corporation in Seattle, sat down with a full governmental advisory committee to share points of view, to share ideas about a potential way forward, because you may recall there is a pause in any move toward delegating that as a GTLD because a group of governments in the Amazon region of South America had expressed opposition to its delegation. And after several processes, very complex processes for working through this particular contention, there's a process underway now where the parties are directly engaging with each other and have agreed to continue talking with each other to see if there can be reached a mutually acceptable solution. The At-Large Advisory Committee held a number of sessions, and they represent the user interest in ICANN, the individual internet user, and so they're very interested in things like consumer safeguards. They're interested in ICANN accountability, and they have been very, very active in weighing in on every aspect of ICANN policymaking at Abu Dhabi. They also sat with the Government Advisory Committee to talk with ICANN on a number of operational issues. And you may be interested to know, if you've ever tried to navigate the ICANN website, there is a very large project that's been approved underway to use document management and best practices to not just redo the website, but use the website as a complete document repository and navigation tool for stakeholders. And then finally, this webinar is an example of how at-large teams with the Global Stakeholder Engagement Group to do more outreach and encourage people to become involved and learn more about ICANN. And so we are always meeting to collaborate on that as well. So I'm going to ask Susanna, who was actually there at Abu Dhabi, if she would like to comment on anything we've discussed so far, or just your personal observations of how the meeting went.
Sure. Do you want to roll to the next slide?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, so for those who missed my introduction, I'm Susanna Gray. I am the president of the San Francisco Bay Area Internet Society chapter. And I attended, in fact, I think I was the only one of us here speaking who attended the meeting in Abu Dhabi. I attended as a fellow. So I'm going to give a quick overview of my experience on the fellowship program. So the fellowship program has been around for over 10 years, but until 2016, it wasn't actually open to people based in North America. So once the geographical restrictions were lifted, and that was 2016, I think, I applied and was selected as a fellow for the ICANN 60 meeting. So I joined about 60 other people from around the world to take part in what they call a fast-track program of community engagement to try and learn a little bit more about the various structures that make up ICANN. So if you're unfamiliar with ICANN meetings are, completely overwhelming. They're lengthy, they have loads of parallel sessions, and there are several hundred sessions over the course of the meeting week. In fact, even if you are familiar with ICANN meetings and ICANN structures, the meetings can get quite overwhelming. And I'd say it takes at least 2 or 3 meetings to even begin to get a good grip on the various committees, the tracks, and the discussions that are going on. So what the fellowship program does is offer an in-depth overview of the role and the work of each of the supporting organizations and advisory committees. It helps you learn how to contribute to policy development and helps you find out which is the right community to join depending on your expertise or focus. It also teaches you how to navigate ICANN meetings so you can get the best out of them, so you don't just wander around with a confused and dazed look on your face. Excuse me. I think for me, like the most beneficial part of the fellowship was that fellows get to directly address community leaders and senior ICANN staff, including the CEO and board members, in a no holds barred kind of setting. So the mantra of the fellowship program is, when you're a fellow, there are no stupid questions. So you can essentially put whatever subject you like on the table and can expect an answer. It might not be the answer you want, but you will get your question discussed. In fact, some of the most politically charged and difficult questions that were put to some of the ICANN leadership came from fellows in Abu Dhabi. So that was quite interesting. Next slide, Joe. Thank you. So how can you get involved in the fellowship? How can you take part? Well, there's an intensive application process, and you'll need to demonstrate your work or your interest in internet governance to be considered. I think the program, personally, I think the program is more effective if you have at least a basic level of knowledge about ICANN or have been to an ICANN meeting before. Otherwise, as I said, you'll spend the entire meeting week in a state of shock and confusion, just trying to get to grips with all the acronyms. And I believe the application round for ICANN 61 is closed, but ICANN 62 and 63 are still open for fellowship applications. Although to take part in the Panama meeting in June, only alumni can apply. That's because I think this meeting is policy-based, and you'll need background information to participate effectively. And finally, just a quick note, there's also, this is, for anybody who is part of an indigenous community, ICANN has a global Indigenous Ambassadors program. And those selected as Indigenous ambassadors take part in the full fellowship program alongside the other fellows. We actually have one of the Indigenous ambassadors here on the call today. So if you or anybody you know would be interested in that, then you can get in touch with Matt Rantanen, who is here on the call. So I think Joe will now give a bit more information on some of the other programs that are available. But if anybody has any questions about the fellowship or the Indigenous Ambassadors Program, or participating in ICANN meetings as a newcomer, then please just get in touch with me, and I'd be glad to give you some more information about that. And Matt has just put his email address in the chat there if anybody would like to talk to him about Indigenous ambassadorship. Thanks.
Thanks, Susanna. It's always great to have that first-person account of being at an ICANN meeting, so that's much appreciated. So I won't go too much more into the fellowship since Susanna did such a great job of explaining it and what it works, how it works. But we do have a couple of other opportunities for folks. We have a next-gen program for universities and folks in higher education programs, and we have a newcomer program for those just entering the ICANN community. The newcomer program is a self-educating, self-taught program. We have a lot of courses on what we ICANN Learn, which is at learn.icann.org. I'll put it in the chat. But you can take different courses on Introduction to ICANN, Internet Governance, ICANN Meetings, ICANN Policy Development. There's a lot of great content there, and you can see some of the promotional videos that are on the bottom there. The next gen that I mentioned is different from the fellowship. So the fellowship candidates must be at least 21 years of age, but there's no other age limit, and the priority is an interest in continuing engagement as a volunteer. The next gen program, applicants must be between the ages of 18 and 30 and live and be enrolled in higher learning curriculum within the region that the ICANN meeting is being held. So for instance, for the next ICANN meeting, which is in San Juan, that is within the North America region at ICANN. So the applicant will have to be enrolled in higher learning and reside within the North America region at ICANN, which is basically the US, Canada, and the island territories. And approximately 20 to 30 candidates are selected for next gen. And there is funding for these programs. So for the fellowship and the next gen program, travel and accommodations and a stipend are provided. There is no fee to attend an ICANN meeting. The meeting is free, so the only costs are getting there, your hotel stay and things like that. The newcomer, there's no funding for that. As I said, it's just kind of a self-educated program, and there's more information at the email address there, engagement@icann.org. And that brings us to Q&A. I think we had a couple of questions that were in the chat earlier in the presentation. Chris, you had?
Yeah, I saw there's one from Eve Edelson.
Yeah, so Eve,
Do you want to start with that? I can start with that.
So yeah, I don't think she has her microphone enabled. So if we can just read the question out for those people who are maybe on the phone and can't see the chat. Eve asked, this was during the GTLD section, and Eve asked, how is the extent of different types of abuse measured?
Yeah, so it's a great question. That refers to when I was talking about the review team that's talking about looking at the effects on consumer choice and competition and trust. And the review team commissioned a number of reports. If you do have access to the chat, I've put a link to one of the reports in there, but if you don't, we can make sure to distribute it afterward. So the statistical analysis of DNS abuse in GTLDs was looking at things like spam, phishing, the spread of malware, and they were looking to see if the web names, the web addresses used to do these bad things, commit these bad activities, were, if the rate of them was any greater in the new GTLDs, like the .gurus or .xyz or .samsung or you name it, versus the legacy TLDs. And so in the statistical analysis, there is a taxonomy, there are examples, and then they did a sampling based on testing, and I don't know where all of the abuse reports came from, but I think the best thing, if you're interested in the in this topic, is to read the report, or at least the summary. I would also like to add the Chief Technology Officer's office within ICANN is undertaking a newer project, which is also called Domain Abuse Activity Reporting, and it's trying to do more real-time study and reporting on domain name registration for the purposes of committing abuses, and giving information to the community to identify threat trends, best practice, to share stories and examples as new threat vectors are developed. And so if you're interested in domain abuse, that is also, I put another link in the chat. We'd be delighted to have more observers and participants in that work. I hope that helps. What's the next question? Is there more than one in the chat, or would anyone like to ask one over the phone?
Yes. Chris. Yeah, Jolie has two questions. The first one is, where does the at-large review stand, specifically the proposal to change the structure of at-large?
And then is there another? The second question is, can we start with the second question?
Sure, yeah. So the second question is, more generally, could you talk about the empowered community concept?
Okay, thanks for that. Meanwhile, Joe's just checking into the first question, so it's easier to stall by answering the second question. So now we're revealing all of our tricks as facilitators and presenters. Joe addressed the IANA stewardship transition when ICANN's contractual relationship with the U.S. government was allowed to expire about a year and a month ago. And in order for that to happen, really over the course of a year and a half or 2 years, again, Joe referred to all the community's work on this, the community was asked to evaluate the governance structures of ICANN, and in the plan for the absence of the role of, quote-unquote, the adult in the corner, which many people consider the U.S. government in the form of the Department of Commerce to be. And what the community did is they replaced this perceived stewardship, this perceived authority that the U.S. government had over the IANA function specifically, with a concept called the empowered community. And so there are certain new powers that are given to the community, for example, to reject the budget, to reject the strategic plan, to dismiss a board member for cause, to dismiss the entire board if they're not acting in accordance with the bylaws. They have a role related to independent review procedures. And so these new community powers were enshrined in new bylaws. And the empowered community really means, it's really there in the instance of an impasse, or the instance of an ICANN that's gone rogue, that a representatives from a selection of those constituent bodies within ICANN, the 7 SOs and ACs, can convene to start a process to address the impasse and do one of those things to take an action. Now, another thing the empowered community needs to do is they need to come together to approve any changes to some of the bylaws. There's a subset of bylaws which are kind of like the Bill of Rights or the top, the fundamental bylaws, which are only changeable, not just the board and the organization and the community have to agree, but this additional layer of the empowered community has to agree. And so they have actually convened to enact a bylaw that was required by the IANA stewardship process. I hope that helps, Jolie, with the empowered community question. I'm just going to pause to see if we have the ALAC review question. Jumping back to the reviews don't just relate to ICANN's work, like whether consumer trust or competition are being enhanced by new GTLDs, but they also, in the bylaws, it's mandated that community volunteers convene on a regular basis. They hire an outside consultant, and they look for a review of constituent parts of ICANN. And there was a review undertaken about the at-large organization. There was a report issued. The at-large responded to the report, and I think the report recommended, as Jolie is saying, some changes to at-large, but I confess I don't know the exact status of that right now. If you know, Jolie, and you want to share it, I'm happy for you to do that. Otherwise, this may be one where I need to find the right link to update report and pass that along. I don't remember it being on the Abu Dhabi agenda, but I may not have been looking in the right place. Sorry about that.
And just to add to that, I've put a link in the chat to the pages about the at-large review. I also don't remember it being on the agenda in Abu Dhabi, but I could be wrong. But we can get back to you, Jolie. Oh, look, Glenn is typing something. I didn't realize Glenn was on the call. Glenn, do you have an update on that?
If we have Glenn McKnight in the room or on the line, he certainly would have a better update, most likely.
Okay, he's saying that the review wasn't a topic. Yeah, I don't remember it being discussed.
Okay, well, Jolie, we'll connect with you to get you the latest status report regardless.
Are there any more questions? I do have one, but if anybody else wants to ask their questions, they should go ahead. Okay, then I guess I'll go ahead. So looking forward to the next ICANN meeting, aside from the .amazon debate and the GDPR, which dominated a lot of the conversations at ICANN 60, what are the hot topics that you expect to be discussed in the next meeting?
So I will again invite all of you on the call, even if you can't travel to San Juan. The time zones are not as bad as some other locations for ICANN meetings, and they are all live streamed and interpreted, and you can ask questions, and you can look early before the meeting to choose agenda topics that you may be following. So, today we tried to do an assortment of topics that we thought were the headlines that might be issues that people on the line would care about, whether they're an intellectual property lawyer or whether they're an internet entrepreneur or a domain, they register domain names or manage them for their companies, or even if they just care about the governance, the multi-stakeholder model and internet governance that ICANN is an example of. So predicting ahead, Susanna, for your question of what the headlines will be from San Juan, I think you did mention already a couple of them. I would add that what's called Workstream 2, which is that the last overhang of the IANA stewardship transition, which included things like not just ICANN's jurisdiction, but also whether and how to use language to get human rights into the ICANN bylaws, things like the accountability of the community structures themselves and the staff. Like these are all, there's a number of subgroups and subtopics, and they all need to be getting close to conclusion in San Juan. So it may be that by that time the community is ready to finally declare victory, and you'll all have a chance to, it won't be concluded, but it will be advanced to the state where people are able to comment publicly on it. So I think that will be very big. I think also, and I don't know if it's of interest to people on the call, but we have technical topics at each ICANN meeting, and some of them are very introductory, which are about how things work. But recently there have also been some technical topics about the future of the domain name system and disruptive technologies. And so, I think we believe that part of ICANN's role, and certainly the technical community's role, is to keep abreast of the latest technological developments that might enhance or disrupt or enable or empower or distort the domain name system. And so those seem to grow at each ICANN meeting. So I would keep an eye out for those, and if people have interest, we can report on that in the next readout.
Great. Thanks.
Susanna, I think you mentioned you might have someone else wanting to weigh in as well.
Yeah, so Sebastian has just popped up and volunteered to give a quick update on the at-large review. So if he could just take 2 minutes to answer Jolie's question, that would be great. Sebastian?
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me okay. I am Sébastien Bacholet, a member of the ILAC from France currently, and I used to be on the board of ICANN for 4 years, elected by at large. Just to give an update on where we are, the board effectiveness committee requests staff who is in charge of the reviews, to make a document to compare the proposal of the reviewers and the proposal of at large and ILAC. And with that, they will think about and decide which way to go. From the ILAC perspective, we requested to have access to this document prior to go to the board committee. I am not sure that it will be done, but we hope that when the committee of the board will have made his mind, we will have a chance to discuss with them before any final decision by the board. I think that it's a shorter way to describe where we are, and thank you for letting me in to discuss that topic. And thank you for organizing this meeting.
Thanks, Sebastian. So Chris, Joe, do we have anything else, any last words we need to say before we close?
First, a very large thank you again for the ISOC chapter that does such an impressive job also as an at-large structure of conveying this information. We really welcome your feedback. So if we can tailor a future readout to your particular interests, please let us know. If there are things that are harder or easier to grasp or understand or are more or less relevant to your needs, we really, really would welcome that. And ideally, we would like to be able, for all of you who are on the call, to feel like you can proudly walk around and say, I know what's going on at ICANN, because believe me, you know a lot more than most of the world, even if you've just attended this call for the first time. And also to encourage you to understand that You don't need to feel like you need to go to every meeting. You don't need, we encourage you to sign up for working groups and mailing lists and newsletters. But even if all you want to do is tune in for these readout sessions, I hope that among your coworkers or your colleagues or your fellow students or the communities in which you work, you can feel like a person who's connected to ICANN's work. So again, thank you, and please do give us feedback through Susanna and the chapter or directly. Let us know how we can do better.
Great, and thanks so much to Chris and Joe for such an interesting oversight into what happened at the last meeting, and hopefully you've given people some preparation for the next meeting. So with that, I think I will close the event, and hopefully we'll be doing another readout after the next ICANN meeting, and we'll see you all again then. So have a great afternoon, everybody, or evening, depending on where you're located, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next call.